Welcome to Orensha Tech's PowerShell series. In this lesson, we're going to be going over objects. So let's first ask the question of what is an object? Objects are the primary structure of data in PowerShell. And not only does PowerShell use this, but a lot of other programming languages also use objects. So you may be familiar with the term and how it is used in scripting languages and programming languages. So objects are a way to create a unified structure to hold data and take actions on that data. And let's look at an example of this with our git process command. So we can see here that we got all of our processes and it was piped into a table. But before it was piped into this table, it was a collection of objects. And you can see here that the table only shows certain of the properties inside this object. But there are a lot more that are hidden inside the object itself before it reaches this point. And to see inside the object, we can run a command called getMember. So let's do that now. So we can see here that the process object holds all of these different members. Some of them are methods or actions, and some of these are properties or data. And if we really wanted to, we could pipe this into an HTML document to see in a nice format. So now that that's run, we can open up that file and see exactly what was created using this command. So we can see here, this is the full collection of objects with all of the members and methods in one table using the HTML format. So if you ever are interested in what an object contains and what you can do with it and what kind of data it has, use that convert to HTML. It's going to give you a nice formatted version to look at, and it's definitely a tool you want to be familiar with when you're discovering new commands. So let's review some of the terminology there. An object represents a single entity, such as a process or a service or a file. A property is a data point of that object. A method is an action that you can take on that object, and a collection is a group of objects, such as when we run git process and have all of our processes as objects in the pipeline. Now, the use of objects in PowerShell is rooted in Windows, which is an object-oriented software. And objects allow you to transcend simple text manipulation to achieve your goals and give you an entity to work with in a lot more powerful of a way than a lot of other scripting languages do. And that's what makes PowerShell so great. It's a scripting language and a shell. So you're able to accomplish a lot much faster because of this merging of functionalities. So let's dissect the object and get into all of the different parts a little deeper. The first one we're going to look at is getMember. And this is something you're going to use so often you will want to know the alias for getMember, which is GM. So let's run that now. So if you pipe in a command to GM, that is your getMember. It's very useful, and you definitely want to keep that on the forefront of your mind when you're using commands. Now, when you're running git process, the full object that we saw in that HTML file is in the pipeline before it reaches the table that you're normally used to seeing. And that is what getMember takes and gives you here, the full object, not just the 5 columns that we saw at the very beginning. And if we scroll all the way to the top here, we can actually see the type name, which gives us what type of object we are working with. And in this case, that is the system diagnostics process. So definitely something to look at. The type name right here at the beginning when you run get member. And then everything else below here is a member, whether that is an event, a method, a property. And let's look at these properties a little deeper. So you can see here we have these different types of properties: script property, note property, alias property. And that is because the underlying core of PowerShell .NET uses properties, but PowerShell takes certain pieces and creates new properties, which are these alias property and script property, to give you a little bit more functionality to that object. And PowerShell uses the extensible type system to accomplish this. And again, this is generally done to make administration easier for you. But as far as you should be concerned, all of these properties behave the exact same way, and they are effectively the same thing. They are all properties for you to work with. And these properties can contain string or integers or even more objects. Next, let's look at the methods, which are the actions that we can take on the objects. And you can see here we have one called kill. Now let's see what happens when we run this. So we took get process and then filtered on our Steam process, put that in parentheses, and then used .kill with parentheses to run the method in that object to terminate that process. Now you generally don't see this very often in PowerShell because there's usually a corresponding commandlet that does the same thing, and you pipe your object into that other command. So let's take a look at that. So we have the stop process command that is going to do the same thing, and it is up to your preference which one to use, but you are going to see this one a lot more often when you see other people use PowerShell. All right, next let's look at sorting objects, which is primarily done through the sort object command. And let's look at an example of this. We're going to sort our processes on the CPU property using the sort object commandlet. So we can see here it does by default run in the ascending order, but it gave us everything with 0 CPU usage first. Let's run the help on sort object to get a better look at what's happening. So you can see some of the parameters that we have are property, case sensitive, descending, unique. So these are some of the things that we can use to help us sort the objects in the way that we want to see them, especially this descending and property. Those are going to be the two you'll use the most. And if you wanted to do a multi-layered sort, we could always do that by specifying multiple properties. So we can run GPS, pipe that into our sort object commandlet, specify the property, and then run CPU, comma, ID. So that's going to take it and sort it on CPU first and then on ID. So very useful to be able to take your objects and compile them in a way that is manageable for you. Next, let's look at selecting certain properties within our objects. And we use this through the select object commandlet. And just like I said, this allows you to take your object and only grab certain properties from those objects to use in the pipeline or a variable later on. If we run the help on this commandlet, we can see how it works. So you can see some of the parameters we have are property, exclude property, expand property, first, last, skip, unique. So these are some of the ways that we can run this command to narrow down what data is in our objects to make it easier to work with. And let's look at this with our get process command. So we'll get process and get our PowerShell process and pipe that into select object and grab our threads property. So we can see there, now the full huge object for a process was narrowed down to just the threads property. And another cool thing is that expand property parameter. And that's going to take a property that is an object and expand that out into the full data set that is contained inside the object. So you can see it took our initial objects and then gave us all the data within them. Now, don't confuse the select object with the where object command. The select object is grabbing properties from the object, while the where object is filtering on the collection of objects to only grab certain objects, but it still retains the full set of properties unless you filter them out using the select object command. Now, I really want to drill down on the idea that objects remain their full object while they're still in the pipeline, and they really only become a file or a table right at the very end. So they are a workable object the entire time they are in the pipeline. And let's look at some commands to really demonstrate this. So if we take get process and pipe that into get member, we can see that we have the system diagnostics process object. But if we were to select certain properties from that, we would actually change the object. So if we run get process and then select the name, ID, and CPU properties, and then pipe that into get member, we can see that the object actually changed to selected system diagnostics process. And then we can even see if we take our get process, pipe that into get member, and pipe it into get member again, it changes the object to a Microsoft PowerShell commands member definition object. So when you're in the pipeline, your objects can change, but they are always going to remain objects till the very end. And this is one of the most empowering parts of PowerShell, because objects are super useful and make administration a lot easier. And remember, use the help when you want to learn how to run commands, but use get member to learn what an object contains inside, to learn about all the different properties and methods that you can use on those objects. And that wraps up this lesson. And in the next lesson, we are going to go over the power of the pipeline and take a deeper dive into all of the cool things the pipeline can do. Thanks for watching and have a good day.